Every Tuesday was the same for me. Quiet, tidy, and enough time to breathe before the week swallowed everything. Caleb had left for work early the morning shift at the factory, always in a rush, always apologizing for not being home more. I stood in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that was still hot, watching the wall clock creep a little past 7. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind of cold that makes dry leaves scrape against each other like crumpled paper. I had promised myself that this year I would clear the garden lot on the north side, the piece of land I bought back when my wife was still alive. A place with an old shed behind the yard where the kids used to run around laughing until their throats went hoarse. But since Mia disappeared almost 2 years ago, I had barely set foot there, as if not looking would make the pain feel less real. So I hired Ramon, a yard man who worked steadily, spoke little, and seemed reliable. I sent him the address of the lot and the gate code. "Just clear it back a bit," I said. "I don't want to get fined for weeds." Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. Ramon's name showed on the screen. I answered. "Ramon?" There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then his voice dropped low, like he was afraid someone might hear. "Mr. Hale, right now, is anyone there?" My hand went numb around the mug handle. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "I'm clearing near the shed behind the yard." And I heard a very faint groan, like someone trying not to make noise. "It's coming from under the ground, like there's a basement. And sir, that's not a cat." In that moment, the whole kitchen seemed to turn cold, because the key to that lot, Ethan still had it, and I suddenly understood. Maybe all this time, it wasn't only weeds that had been growing there. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, my hands still shaking. The coffee in my mug had gone cold without me noticing, leaving a thin brown ring on the wood. I stood motionless in the familiar kitchen, listening to my own breathing. Like if I breathed too hard, something would crack. That land, I call it the garden to make it easier on my heart. In truth, it's a small lot in the same state, about an hour's drive from my house, with a row of old trees, an iron gate, and an old wooden shed in the back where my wife, Margaret, used to grow herbs and hang wind chimes. Whenever the wind blew, the chimes tinkled like laughter, clear and careless. But since Margaret died, the garden slowly became a place I avoided. I told myself I was busy. My back hurt. I didn't have time. The truth was, I couldn't stand being there alone, staring at things that once belonged to a family and now were only memories. Then Mia disappeared. Mia was Caleb's daughter, my younger son's little girl, 7 years old, black hair, big eyes, and a habit of tugging at my sleeve whenever she wanted to ask something, like she was afraid of bothering me. Nearly 2 years ago, she vanished on an afternoon that felt ordinary at the time. There were searches, police, flyers everywhere, fake calls, hopes that flared up and died out. Nights when I could hear Caleb pacing the living room like a shadow, never crying out loud, yet breaking apart anyway. And me, I'm old. I've lived through enough loss to understand that pain can make a person quiet. But quiet doesn't mean forgotten. Ethan, my oldest son, hadn't been the Ethan I knew for a long time. The day his wife died in childbirth, taking the baby with her before it ever opened its eyes, it was like someone drained all the blood out of him. He didn't live with me. He rented a small apartment across town, but he would appear and disappear like a habit. And the garden lot, I'd given him the key in the first months after the funeral. He said he wanted to store his wife and child's keepsakes somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would touch. I respected that. I told myself it was better he had something to hold on to than to watch him slip out of my life completely. Now, with Ramon talking about a groan under the shed floor, everything I'd filed away in the drawer labeled, "Don't think about it," suddenly flew open. I picked up the phone again and called Ramon back. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it didn't sound like mine. "Ramon, where are you right now?" "Outside, near the shed, sir." I stepped away from the door. I don't want to go in again." "You did the right thing. Stay there, but don't go near the door. If you can, stand somewhere you can see the way in. Don't hang up." "Yes, sir." I hear it again. I closed my eyes. Useless images flashed in my head. A child's shoe left behind, A door creaking open, a flashlight beam cutting across rotten wood. I opened my eyes and looked around my own house, the one place I still believed was safe. Suddenly it felt too bright, too normal, like it was trying to mock me. I grabbed my car keys, then a big flashlight, spare batteries, gloves. I reached for my jacket, but stopped when I saw Caleb's note on the fridge. "Dad, remember to eat lunch. I'll be home late." His handwriting was messy, hurried. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Like part of me wanted to call Caleb right then, to pull him into this so I wouldn't be carrying it alone. But I didn't call. Not yet. I had no proof. Just a bad feeling, and a whispered phone call. I stepped outside, and shut the door behind me. The morning air slapped cold against my face, forcing me awake. I got in the car, started the engine, and as the tires rolled down the driveway, I realized my heart was beating in a strange rhythm, the rhythm of someone about to see the thing they've spent their whole life trying not to face. On the road, Ramon stayed on the line. Sometimes he didn't speak at all, just breathed like saying anything more would make it real. And then, as I turned onto the dirt road that led to the garden, the signal started to break up. Ramon spoke fast, his voice gone rough. "Mr. Hale, a car just pulled in. I think someone's here." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "What kind of car?" A pause. Then Ramon whispered, barely getting the words out. "A gray car. It parked right by the gate. And the person who got out looks like someone who's been here before." 10:02. I slammed on the brakes right before the iron gate. The moment the car stopped, I saw Ramon standing a short distance from the shed, his back rigid like a drawn wire. The gate shrieked as I pushed it open, an ugly, scraping sound in the emptiness. The smell of wet grass and rotting leaves hit me hard, a familiar ache of a scent, because it was the smell of seasons when Margaret used to stand beside me. Ramon looked at me the way you look at someone about to walk into a place they shouldn't. "The gray car, Mr. Hale," he said softly. "It just left. That person, I can't be sure, but the way they walked felt familiar." I didn't ask more. I knew Ramon wouldn't make things up. He was the kind of man who only said what he saw, and stayed silent about the rest. I nodded and signaled for him to stay behind me, away from the shed. Not because I wanted to act brave, because I needed a witness, other than my own heart hammering out of control. The garden had turned into a thicket, grass up to my knees, scrub bushes growing wild like someone had wanted it to swallow every path. The shed sat in the back, its tin roof dulled with age, its wooden door darkened by sun and rain. I used to paint that door with Caleb and Ethan, 3 of us laughing with paint all over our hands. Now, looking at it, it felt like a mouth clamped shut. I moved closer. The padlock on the outside was big and new, still shiny with oil, nothing like the rusted old lock I remembered. A small detail, but enough to chill my spine. I crouched, took photos of the lock, the scratches around the latch, scratches that looked like someone had changed it in a hurry, hands shaking, key going in crooked. Ramon cleared his throat behind me. I heard it from under the floor. "It's not steady. Comes and goes. But it sounds like someone trying to hold it in." I didn't answer. I reached for the lock. The key I had only opened the gate and the shed's outer door. The key to this new padlock I didn't have. And that, by itself, was an answer. I tugged lightly on the wooden door. Nothing. I pressed my palm to the wood, cold, damp. I bent to peer at the bottom seam. A dark streak like liquid had run down more than once, dried, then run again. Water, or something else? I stepped back and listened. No one, no engine, just wind in the leaves and Ramon's breathing. And in that silence, I heard it thin as thread. Not a cat, not the wind, a low, strangled groan, like someone was down there without the strength to cry out. I turned to Ramon, my voice raw. "You hear that?" He nodded hard, his face gone pale. "Yes, sir." Part of me wanted to call the police right then, but another part, one that had lived long enough to know how easily the truth could be twisted if you stepped wrong, forced me to do the hardest thing. Gather more evidence, right now, while time was still moving. I circled behind the shed. Tall grass slapped my legs, leaving cold moisture on my shins. I spotted a small window, an old vent window, set close to the ground. The glass was filthy, But one corner had been wiped recently. A narrow, clean swipe like a fingertip had passed over it. I shone my flashlight in. Inside was dark, packed with cardboard boxes, coiled wire, fertilizer bags. But in the far left corner I saw something that made my stomach knot. A plastic water bottle, the kind made for kids, with a folded straw rolling on the floor. There was still condensation on it. I pressed my ear to the wooden wall. Too muffled. I tapped once, dull, solid. I tapped again, still solid. Then I shifted my hand slightly to the right and tapped again. The sound changed. Hollow. I froze, like I'd touched an invisible gap in the world. I knocked again. Harder. Hollow. I looked back at Ramon. He stared at me, eyes wide, like he'd heard it too and didn't want to believe it. I swept the flashlight down along the base of the wall. There was a stretch of dust that had been wiped clean in a long line, like something heavy had been dragged back and forth more than once. And on the ground near the back of the shed, there were faint shoe prints, adult prints paced in and out, then half swallowed by grass. Not Ramon's, not mine. I went back around to the front, my heart pounding up into my throat. The new padlock sat there, shining like a dare. I pulled out my phone and called Martin. It rang twice before his voice came through, steady enough to make me want to cling to it. Gordon? I'm at the garden lot, I said fast, forcing my voice level. There's a new padlock. There's a sound. Ramon heard it. I heard it. And there's a section of wall. Hollow. Martin went quiet for a beat, then lowered his voice. Are you safe? No one's here right now. But Ramon said a gray car came in and left. Listen to me, Martin said, his tone shifting into the voice of someone who knows crisis. Don't break the lock. Don't open anything by yourself. Take photos, take video, timestamp it. Then we call the authorities with an emergency basis. Do you understand? If this involves a child, one wrong step, and they'll turn you into the trespasser. I swallowed hard. But if in there, it's Mia. I couldn't finish. I was afraid that saying her name in this place would make the truth come down like a collapsing roof. Martin spoke slowly, each word like a nail. If it's Mia, then you have to do it right. So her brother can't say you made it up. So no one can take her again. I stared at the shed door. Wind moved through the trees. And then, from somewhere under the floor, another groan, shorter this time, like a plea being crushed. I ended the call and turned to Ramon. Stay here. Stand where you feel safe. If anyone comes, back away. And any sound you hear, record it. Ramon nodded, lips pressed tight. I stepped back, raised my phone, and filmed everything. The gate, the path, the padlock, the vent window, the clean streak on the glass, the child's water bottle. I filmed the hollow wall section and the drag marks along the base. Each image felt cold and clinical, but I needed it. I needed something firmer than fear. And right as I was recording, the sound of an engine rolled up the dirt road outside. I spun around. A gray car, pulled tight to the gate, and Ethan stepped out, staring straight at me like he'd known exactly where I'd be standing, and exactly when. Ethan closed the car door so softly it sounded like a move he'd practiced, then walked in through the gate. He didn't look at Ramon, he looked straight at me. The look of someone entering a room and wanting to take control of the air in it immediately. What are you doing here, Dad? He asked, his voice so normal it was irritating, like I was the one out of place on my own land. I saw his hand clench and then release a small, fast beat, the reflex of someone tense. I kept my phone in my hand but lowered it, not letting on I'd just been recording. I hired someone to clean up the garden, I said, trying to keep my voice even, like I was talking about the weather. It's been too long. The weeds got out of control. Ramon heard something strange and called me. The second I finished, Ethan's eyes flicked toward the shed. One quick, sharp glance, then back to me. Something strange. He let out a small laugh that had no joy in it. It's just the wind. It's an old shed. Pipes, rats, stray cats. Could be anything. 8. Ramon stood a few steps away. I saw his throat bob. He wanted to speak, but didn't dare. I lifted a hand, signaling him to stay quiet, not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew this conversation would slide straight down a dangerous slope if Ethan felt confronted. Ethan stepped closer, and his eyes shifted into something softer, the same look that had made me give in countless times over the past 2 years. "Dad, don't come out here anymore," he said, lowering his voice like he didn't want to hurt me. "I told you. I keep Laura's things here. My things. The baby's things." He swallowed, like the name was still sharp. "When you come here, I can't take it." A wave of pity rose up in me on instinct, like an automatic mechanism of a father. If your kid hurts, you back off. But then that thin, thread-like groan came again from under the floor, short, broken, like someone trying to swallow their cry inside their throat. Ethan heard it too. I knew because his pupils pinned, because he froze for exactly 1 beat before he spoke again. "See?" he said. "Faster now. A little too fast," like he was chasing his own words. "Wind." I looked straight at him. I didn't expose him. I just watched the small pieces. Sweated his temple even though the air was cold, his thumbs rubbing against each other over and over, his eyes dodging every time I glanced at the padlock. "New lock?" I asked, so light it could have passed as curiosity. Ethan snapped his head around, then put on a smile that looked built in a hurry. "Yeah, I changed it. The old key kept sticking. And, he blinked. Laura's things. I don't want anyone touching them." I nodded slowly. "I get it. Thanks for watching." I said it, and it felt like swallowing a rock. Ethan exhaled, like he'd just made it through a tight spot. He took another step and lowered his voice. "Go home, Dad. Let me handle this. I'll clean up. I'll check the shed. You don't need to." Then he looked at Ramon for the first time, his gaze cooling just a little. "Hire strangers." Ramon went still, staring at the ground. I clamped my anger between my teeth. "Ramon works for me. He's not a stranger," I said, still keeping my voice flat. Ethan gave a thin, dry smile. "Fine. But from now on, let me." Then he changed the subject like pulling a curtain over a window. "How's Caleb?" he asked, like saying his brother's name would summon that family feeling he knew I was weak to. "He's trying," I said. "Every day he's trying." Ethan nodded, and something flickered in his eyes, not quite regret, more like exhaustion wrapped in reasons. He stepped closer. Close enough I could smell soap and something metallic on his breath, and he spoke softly. "Dad, don't make this messy. You can't handle another loss." That hit the softest spot dead center. He spoke like he cared, but it landed like a warning. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I wondered, was Ethan afraid for me or afraid for himself? I nodded again, pretending to soften. "I just wanted the lot cleaned up," I said. "I'll go. But Ramon's already here. Let him finish this morning." Ethan shook his head immediately. "No, stop. I'll pay him. He goes home." Ramon looked at me, panicked. I knew if I pushed, Ethan would either explode or do something that would slam every door shut. I drew in a breath and nodded at Ramon. "Go ahead and leave," I said, loud enough for him to understand this was an order, not abandonment. "I'll call you later. Isway." Ramon hesitated, then backed away slowly, his eyes still on the shed like he was afraid leaving meant leaving someone in the dark behind. When he got in his truck and drove off the dirt road, Ethan watched him go, then turned back to me. The smile was gone. "Go home, Dad," he said again, harder. I stepped back. The car keys in my hand felt twice as heavy. "Yeah," I said. "I'm going." As it works, he was Breska. I turned and walked to my car, but my mind was locked on one image. That child's water bottle beaded with cold, and that muffled groan crushed under wood. I drove off the property while the rearview mirror still caught Ethan standing at the gate, watching until I was completely gone like he needed to be sure I really left. And a few minutes later, when I pulled over on an empty stretch of road just to breathe, my phone vibrated. A text from Ethan. "Don't come back. I'll clean everything up. I love you, Dad." I stared at the word love, and my spine went cold because it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a lid being pressed down on something struggling underneath, and I memorized my breath. In that moment, the breath of a man who just realized he wasn't facing only a secret, but a son who might do anything to make sure that secret never got opened. I didn't drive straight home. I kept going for a while, until I reached an empty parking lot beside an old hardware store. I killed the engine and sat there like a man who'd just walked out of a storm, but could still hear the wind whipping inside his ears. Ethan's text sat on my screen like a cold handprint. Don't come back. That wasn't a plea. It was a line in the dirt, and I knew anyone who draws a line does it for a reason. I called Martin again. He answered immediately, like he'd been waiting. Ethan showed up, I said, my voice hoarse. He changed the lock. He sent Ramon away, and he kept staring at that shed like a guard. Martin went quiet for a beat, then spoke slowly. Did you record anything? I did. The new lock, the child's water bottle, the drag marks, the sound. And Ramon heard it. I looked down at my hands. My palms still held the imprint of the steering wheel. I heard it too. Martin dropped his voice. Good. Now you need 2 more things. An independent witness and a paper trail. If this goes to the police, they'll ask, why do you believe this? And you'll answer with something that doesn't shake. I swallowed hard. What do you think I should do? Go talk to someone who lives near that lot, Martin said. Someone who's seen cars coming and going. Someone who might have heard something. And while you do that, I'll check expenses, transfers, anything that connects to repairing the shed. End quote. I closed my eyes, trying to picture the houses around the garden lot. One face came into focus immediately. Edith Klein, a widow who lived a couple rows of trees away from my gate. The kind of woman who watched through curtains not because she was nosy, but because at her age quiet was a possession. I turned the car around, not back to my land, but down the road that led to Edith's house. The sun was up by then, but it didn't warm anything inside me. I parked, stepped up onto her wooden porch, and knocked. A moment later the door opened a crack. Edith looked at me, small eyes, sharp like someone who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice dry. I knew you'd come sooner or later. That line made my heart drop. You know something? I asked. Edith glanced behind me, checking if I was alone, then opened the door wider. Come in. Don't stand out there like you're afraid of my yard. Effer. Her living room smelled like black tea and old wood. On the table sat a thick notebook, its cover worn at the edges. Edith pulled out a chair for me. No tea offered. No small talk. I've seen Ethan's car, she said bluntly. A lot. At night. Lights off. He'd park right by the gate, go in, then come out with black trash bags, cardboard boxes. She looked me straight in the eye. I told myself, family business. I don't get involved. But then she stopped. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the notebook. Then I started hearing it. My throat went dry. Hearing what? Noises, Edith said. And even though she tried to stay steady, I could see her fingers shake. Not always clear. Some nights, it was just a thud, a door, something dragging. Some nights, it was a groan, thin, like somebody in pain who didn't dare to cry out. I didn't move. A part of me wanted to say she was wrong. The other part knew I'd just heard the same thing from a third person. The one thing I didn't want confirmed. Edith opened the notebook and slid it toward me. Neat handwriting. Dates, times. 11:58 p.m. gray car, entered gate. 12:17 flashlight swept across the shed. 1:5 car, left. One line was underlined hard. 2:12 a.m. groan. Lasted 20-30 seconds. I stared at those numbers like a sentence being read out loud. Why did you write all this down? I asked quietly. Edith exhaled. Her eyes looked a little red. Because I called the police once. Last year. They came, took a quick look, then left. And the next day, Ethan came to my house. She swallowed, and her voice drooped. He didn't threaten me outright. He just smiled and said, Mrs. Edith, sometimes curiosity gets people into trouble. I knew what he meant. She looked away for a second. I'm old. I live alone. I was scared, so I wrote it down. At least, if something happens, I have something to hand over. I dropped my gaze, shame rising in me like hot water, not because Edith had stayed quiet, but because I, a father, had given a key and my trust to a son who was broken, then closed my eyes to everything that didn't make sense. I looked up. Do you have anything else? Edith stood, walked into the back room, then came out with a small USB drive and a sheet of paper. "I put up a camera facing the gate last winter," she said quickly, like she was afraid she'd change her mind. "Just for my own protection." It caught his car. The times once it even caught him opening the gate. "Here." She set the USB on the table like she was setting down a weight. "I don't want to die with it still in my hands." I took the USB, and cold ran up my spine. My phone buzzed. "Martin," I answered immediately. "I've got a witness," I said. "She's got notes. She's got video." And she heard the groans more than once. Martin didn't ask questions. He just said, "Clean and final." "Good. Now we get the paper trail." I heard keyboard clicks on his end. Then his voice turned heavier. "Gordon, over the past 2 years there have been a series of strange expenses listed as shed repairs. There's a large transfer to a man named Travis Morrow out of town. And there are receipts for soundproofing material, a ventilation fan, a small generator, and an electronic lock." I closed my eyes. My heart tightened like a fist. "Are you sure?" "I'm looking at it right now," Martin said, his voice going cold. "There's no official renovation permit for that property, which means if something was built, it was built so nobody would know." I opened my eyes and looked at Edith's notebook, the USB on her table. And in my head, only one sentence remained. Mia didn't vanish from the world. She was hidden. And the person with the key was my own blood. I left Edith's house, with the notebook wrapped in a paper bag, and the USB drive weighing like a lump of lead in my coat pocket, feeling as if I was carrying a piece of truth that the land had been trying to swallow for years. On the way home, I didn't turn on any music. I didn't want any sound to cover the thoughts pounding against my skull. The hours and numbers, the times the gray car came and went, the muffled groans, the invoices for ventilation, fans, and soundproofing materials, everything lined up neatly, like evidence in a case where the victim was my own family. Martin told me to meet him at his office, to cleanly connect the dots before going to the police. And I did exactly that. Martin's office was on the second floor of an old building downtown, smelling of paper and stale coffee, the kind of smell that makes you believe everything in here can be turned into a file. Martin plugged the USB into the computer and skimmed through a few clips. In one, the gray car pulled up tight to the gate near midnight. In another, Ethan's shadow crossed the porch light, carrying 2 black trash bags. In the clip that chilled me the most, Ethan paused for a beat in front of the shed door, tilting his head up and looking around as if checking whether anyone was watching. Martin looked at me, his eyes darkening. "We don't just have a gut feeling," he said. "We have a long-standing pattern of behavior, physical evidence, a witness, and a money trail." I heard the words "money trail" and my insides twisted. Martin spread the documents out in front of me. Transfers to Travis Morrow, purchases of an electronic lock, soundproofing panels, an exhaust fan, even an invoice for a moisture-resistant primer. "No permits," Martin emphasized. "Which means if something was built out there, it was built to hide." I stared at the numbers like I was staring at a betrayal with a signature. "What now?" I asked. And I hated the feeling of having to ask that question. Hated needing someone to tell me how to save my granddaughter from my own son. Martin didn't waste words. "I'm going to call the authorities. But I'm not calling some random patrol cop and marching them out there like a panicked father. I'm calling an investigator I know, Lauren Briggs. She follows procedure, and more importantly, she understands what emergency evidence looks like when there are signs of unlawful confinement." 15 minutes later, I sat across from Lauren Briggs in a small meeting room at the local precinct. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed but steady-voiced, the kind of person who doesn't need to raise her voice for the room to fall in line. I laid out the story from the beginning, without embellishment. Ramon's whispered call, the groan under the floor, the new lock, the drag marks, the child's water bottle, Edith's notes, the camera footage, and finally the unpermitted shed renovation money trail. Lauren watched a clip, then looked straight at me. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I need to be clear. Do you believe someone is being held there unlawfully?" I wanted to say, "I'm afraid," but I told the truth. I believe it. I swallowed hard, my throat burning like sand. "And I'm afraid it's my granddaughter." Lauren nodded without overreacting. "All right, we're going now. But listen to me. You cannot confront your son. If he's the perpetrator, You confronting him will make him move the victim or do something reckless. Do you understand? I understood. I hated that I understood. A convoy of cars left the station without sirens, heading toward the garden property as the day slanted toward late afternoon. In the car, Lauren asked for a few more details. Whether Ethan had legal rights to the land, whose name was on the deed, who else had keys, when I'd last been there. I answered briefly. Because in my head, there was only one objective left. Don't let today end with that door still closed. When we got close, Lauren had the vehicles stop short of the gate and deployed people to different angles like they did this every day. I saw Ramon there too. Martin had called him back as a witness, and he stood tucked behind his own vehicle, still pale. Edith wasn't there, but her notebook and the USB were in Lauren's hands like silent testimony. Mr. Hale, Lauren said, from now on you only do what I tell you. I nodded, my heart hammering as if it wanted to break my ribs. We moved into the shed. The new padlock was still there. Lauren didn't smash it immediately. She took photos, noted the time, measured, and wrote things down. Then she looked at me. You said you heard something from under the floor. Show me where. I led her to the exact spot where I'd stood when I heard the groan. I went quiet, listening. For a moment there was nothing, and then very faint a hitching sound, like a painful breath. Ramon jolted. There, he whispered. Lauren glanced at two officers and nodded. That's exigent, she said. We have signs of a living person. But instead of tearing everything apart, Lauren did something that made me both frantic and grateful. She started measuring. They measured the shed from the outside, then remeasured the interior space, measured the width, compared the numbers, and marked out a missing section in the left corner near the floor where the wooden wall looked normal, but the knock sounded hollow. I watched the numbers and saw the truth forming like a shadow. There was a void being concealed. Lauren swept her flashlight along the baseboard and stopped at a heavy bookshelf pressed tight against the wall, packed with books and toolboxes. This shelf has wheels, she said, her voice still calm. An officer crouched down. It did locking casters. And right beside the shelf's leg, half hidden under a wooden lip, was a small keypad, 4 digits with a red light blinking. My stomach dropped. A code, I whispered, and I didn't understand why my throat tightened like I was about to cry. Lauren looked at me. Can you guess it? I thought of Ethan. Thought of the way pain makes someone cling to dates like a life raft. I shook my head on instinct. Then a number pierced my mind like a needle. The day Mia disappeared. That day, Ethan had come to my house, hugged Caleb, and said, I'll help. I looked at Lauren and gave her 4 digits in a trembling voice. She nodded and keyed them in herself. Wrong. Red light. I swallowed and switched to the day Ethan's wife died. Wrong. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Lauren didn't panic. She was steady, like someone defusing a bomb. Mr. Hale, she said, think like him. He'll lock this with a day that feels right to him. And then I understood not the day of death, not a birthday. The day he started turning grief into control. The day Mia vanished. I spoke the 4 digits again, slow, like a prayer. Lauren entered them. The light turned green. A dry, sharp click sounded. The latch beneath the shelf released, and the shelf shifted slightly, like it exhaled. I stood frozen, my hand wanting to reach out, but not daring. From behind the shelf, very faint, came quick breathing, like someone had heard hope and was afraid it was a trap. Lauren signaled everyone to hold position, then looked at me, her voice lowered but hard as steel. Mr. Hale, we're going to open this by procedure. But you need to be ready. What's behind there may change your life. I heard Lauren say that, and my mind went blank as if every thought had been sucked into the dark gap that had just opened behind the shelf. The officers behind her held formation, flashlights aimed into the opening, the beams cutting through dust hanging in the air. Lauren pulled on gloves, crouched to inspect the edge of the wall, then signaled a colleague to pry the wooden trim loose gently, without damaging the scene. I stood close, but I was kept at the perimeter, like someone who was both the landowner and a man who no longer had the right to decide. When the trim popped free, a low steel door was fully revealed, painted gray, with a bolt lock on the outside, and it felt like someone squeezed my heart hard. That door didn't belong in a shed. It belonged to a place built to confine. Lauren pressed her ear to it. silent for a few seconds. I held my breath too. Then a very faint sound came through, not a groan anymore, but a light scratching, like fingernails against metal. Lauren lifted her head and looked at me for a moment, then turned to her team. "Someone's inside. We're going in." She knocked twice, her voice suddenly gentler. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me? You're safe. I'm police." A long silence, then a ragged breath, and a child's voice, hoarse and shaking. "Grand? Grandpa?" My whole body collapsed in on itself. I grabbed the edge of the shelf, my mouth opening but no sound coming out. "Mia." I managed just one word, and tears surged up without warning, burning hot, as if the last 2 years had been waiting for this moment to break. Lauren signaled for me to stay still, but allowed me to speak. "Mia, it's Grandpa. I'm here. Can you hear me? I'm scared," the tiny voice said, like wind caught in a throat. I wanted to tear the door open with my bare hands, but Lauren kept the rhythm. One officer prepared tools for the lock. Another called for medical staff to wait outside. Another documented the scene on video. "We opened slow, no yanking," Lauren said. "Don't scare her." When the bolt was released, the steel door screeched in a long, drawn-out sound. Dampness, bleach, and the smell of a person living too long in a sealed space rushed out, making my stomach lurch. The flashlight swept in. A small, low compartment, barely big enough for a thin mattress, a few plastic bins, a water jug, a worn child's blanket, and pencil scribbles on the wall. "Son," a little house, and a larger figure holding hands with a smaller one. On the mattress, Mia was curled up like a caged bird, hair tangled, eyes wide against the sudden light. She was so thin, I didn't recognize the familiar lines right away. But those eyes, the eyes that used to look at me every night when I told bedtime stories, couldn't be mistaken. I dropped to my knees, but Lauren stopped me with a light hand. "Let medical approach first. You just talk to her." I swallowed hard. "Mia, I'm sorry. I came too late. You're getting out now." Mia stared at me like she was afraid I was an illusion. She raised a hand to shield her eyes, then lowered it, trembling. Can I go home?" That question hit like a blade. I nodded over and over, out of control. Yes, I'm taking you home." The medic stepped in, speaking softly, wrapping her in a blanket, checking her breathing, calming her down. Mia kept looking at me, never letting go. I held my hand close, not touching her until she reached out and took it herself. Her small hand was cold, bones sharp under skin. I bit down on my lip so I wouldn't sob out loud. And right then, fast footsteps sounded from outside, and Ethan's voice slammed into the air. "Stop! What are you doing in here?" I turned. Ethan stood in the shed doorway, face ghost white, eyes red like he hadn't slept, coat hanging open. He saw the lights, saw the officers, and then saw the steel door standing open. In that instant, whatever control he'd been wearing cracked. "Dad!" he shouted, like I was the one betraying him. Lauren stepped out and placed herself in front of me, her voice cold and clear. "Ethan Hale, you are under investigation for unlawfully confining a child. Stand still. Hands where I can see them." Ethan shook his head wildly. No, you don't understand. She wasn't safe out there. I just kept her here to protect her." Heat surged up in me, but it was stopped cold by the image of Mia in the darkness. I wasn't allowed to lose control. Lauren took one step closer. "Protection is never locking a door from the outside." Ethan snapped his gaze to me, searching for something, pleading. "Dad, I've already lost everything. I just couldn't stand losing one more time." His voice broke, but then it hardened. "Caleb doesn't deserve to be a father. He neglects her. He doesn't see. I see. I know she needs someone." My hands shook with disgust, not because Ethan was hurting, but because Ethan was using hurt as a permit. Lauren signaled. 2 officers moved in. Ethan stepped back once, then stopped, like a man who just realized the game was over. The handcuffs closed around his wrists with a dry click. Ethan shut his eyes, lips moving. "I did it for family." I stared straight at him, my voice low but no longer soft. Family is not an excuse to cage a child. Ethan opened his eyes, tears spilling, but I didn't step toward him. I turned back to Mia. The medics were carrying her out. Mia clutched the blanket, her eyes searching for me in panic. I moved quickly beside her and laid my hand gently on her shoulder so she would know I was here. "I'm here," I said, forcing my voice steady. "You're not alone anymore." Outside, the late afternoon light spilled across the yard, choked with weeds. Mia blinked like she was seeing the sky for the first time in a very long time, and I stood between two things: a granddaughter pulled back into the world, and a son in handcuffs. And in that moment, I understood with a pain so clear it felt physical. Today wasn't only the day we found Mia. Today was the day my family paid for everything we had chosen to stay silent about for too long. That night, I sat in the hospital hallway with my jacket still carrying the smell of damp grass and metal, watching the ER door open and close with the flow of people, like a clock that never stops. Mia was inside with doctors and nurses. They said she was mildly malnourished, vitamin deficient, and suffering from prolonged sleep deprivation. But the most frightening thing wasn't in her blood work or her weight. It was in the way she flinched at every set of footsteps, in the way she held my hand as if I would disappear the moment she let go. I've flown through storms in my life, real storms, where the plane shook like it might snap, but no storm ever made me as helpless as hearing my granddaughter whisper, "Don't go, Grandpa." Caleb arrived close to midnight, his face pale, eyes red, as if he'd been crying in the car but still trying to swallow it down. He rushed to me without asking anything first, just grabbed my shoulders like he needed to be sure I was real. "Dad, where's Mia?" I pointed to the room door. Caleb stood frozen for a few seconds, then collapsed into a chair, head in his hands, letting out a choked sound that wasn't quite a word. I sat beside him, not saying, "Everything's okay," because I knew it wasn't. I only put a hand on my son's back and let him break. When the doctor allowed us in, Caleb walked in like someone entering a sacred place. Mia lay in the bed with an IV, her small face under a big blanket. When she saw Caleb, her body went rigid. Her eyes widened. Then she looked at me like she needed permission. I nodded, gently. Caleb knelt beside the bed, his voice shaking. "Mia, it's Dad." Mia didn't cry right away. She just stared for a long time, like she was matching his face to a memory. Then she lifted one finger and touched Caleb's wrist where the rubber bracelet she once gave him still was, and a sob broke out of her. Caleb pressed his face to the edge of the bed and cried like a child. I stood behind him, and in that moment, I was both happy and ashamed, because part of me understood. If I'd listened to the doubt in my chest sooner, if I hadn't let the key to that property become Ethan's domain, then 2 years of Mia's life might not have been swallowed whole. The next morning, Lauren came to the hospital to take a preliminary statement. She didn't pressure, she asked precisely. "Mia? Who took you there?" Mia looked at me, then at Caleb, then said very softly, "Uncle Ethan." Caleb jerked as if struck. Mia told it in short, broken sentences. After her mother died from postpartum complications, Ethan came to the house and said he'd take Mia out for a while so Caleb could sleep a little. Then he drove her to the garden property, saying it would be for a while, because bad people wanted to take Mia, because Dad Caleb wasn't clear-headed enough to protect her. Izerified. Mia said that at first Ethan was kind. He brought food, brought coloring books, told stories about angels, his wife and child. But as time went on, Ethan came less and less, got irritated more easily, and always locked the door from the outside. When I cried, he told me to be quiet, Mia said, eyes lowered. He said if I made noise, I'd get taken away. Again. I felt Caleb trembling like a taut wire. He stood up and walked into the hallway, back against the wall, breathing out like he might fall. I followed, and for the first time in my life, I had to look my son in the eye and say something that couldn't be fixed with words. "Caleb, your brother did something that can't be excused." Caleb stared at me, hollow-eyed. "I trusted him," he whispered. "I let him carry Mia out." I gripped his shoulder tighter. "It's not your fault for trusting family. The fault is on the one who abused that trust." But saying it didn't make him lighter, because I saw something else in Caleb's eyes. Not only pain for Mia, but pain for Ethan, the brother he used to protect as a kid, now becoming the one who shattered his life. That afternoon, Martin called and said the prosecutor had enough to charge Ethan with serious offenses, and they would seek a no-contact order immediately. I heard it, and my throat went dry. I wasn't happy. I didn't win. I only felt my family being torn into two halves. One half learning how to live again, one half in handcuffs because it chose to turn grief into a prison for someone else. Night fell, and I went back to Mia's room. She slept in fits and starts, her hand still gripping the corner of the blanket. I sat beside her, watched her small face, and made myself a promise. From now on, I would never call silence peace again. And I asked myself, deep down, if the hardest part ahead wouldn't be the courtroom. It would be how to help Mia grow up and still believe that family can be a safe place. 3 months later, Caleb's new apartment was filled with light. No shed, no damp wood smell, no jolting awake to the sound of locks. Mia still went to therapy every week. She still didn't like having her bedroom door closed. And every night before sleep, she asked me the exact same question. "Are you here, Grandpa?" I always answered like a ritual. "I'm here." Caleb joined a support group for parents whose children have experienced trauma. He learned not to punish himself with the words, "if only." And me, I kept the garden property, but I changed the locks, sealed the shed, and turned the file over to the investigator. I didn't sell. I didn't let it become a secret buried in the ground. It had to be evidence clear, clean, impossible to twist. Ethan was awaiting trial. His lawyer tried to call it a psychological crisis after loss. But the judge said it plainly. Grief is not a license to take a child's freedom. One night, Mia handed me a drawing. On it was a sun, a house, and 3 people holding hands. Under the house, she wrote in messy letters, "Don't be silent." I stared at those words for a long time and understood the lesson late and expensive. Grief can make you soft, but boundaries and clear-headedness are what keep the people you love safe. If you were in my situation, what would you do from the very first warning sign? Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is.